Welcome everyone, welcome to Miami. My name is Aaron van Wirdum. I'm technical editor at Bitcoin Magazine.
Hi, I'm Matt. That's a little loud. I worked on Bitcoin Core for about 9 years. I now work on Lightning stuff with Square Crypto.
Yeah, we're going to discuss Bitcoin protocol upgrades. I think where's the title of our talk? Well, it has Taproot in the title. It looks like Taproot is going to activate, and it seems we figured that one out. We're not quite there yet. Are you confident Taproot will upgrade?
Yeah, we could check with Alejandro, who's here somewhere, but I think we're good to go. I think Taproot's going to lock in. We're going to have it in about November.
So yeah, instead of that, we're actually mostly going to be discussing Bitcoin protocol upgrades in general, and specifically sort of the history of Bitcoin protocol upgrades, and even more specifically, I guess that would be the history of soft forks and the way we think about soft forks. I think it's a very interesting topic because, any Bitcoin upgrade it's a change to Bitcoin, and if you're changing Bitcoin, you're really touching the essence of what is actually Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin?
Right, it gets very philosophical very quickly. I'm sure we'll be basically a philosophy talk for the next 20, 30 minutes. But yeah, Bitcoin is, from a technical point of view, a consensus system, right? We have all these nodes. They're enforcing the rules themselves against the miners. The miners can't cheat or anything. And in order for the network to stay together, in order for everyone to have a common view of who owns what coins and what the current blockchain tip is, they all have to enforce the same rules. It's ultimately distributed consensus. So from kind of a technical point of view, you have, every node needs to enforce the same rules. Easy ways to get this would be to have only one node and run a database, have some central authority who could tell everyone what they have to be running. And obviously, these things aren't applicable for Bitcoin. Why would we be doing that? That's not Bitcoin, obviously. So this is kind of inherently in tension with, you don't want to have anyone telling anyone what to do. You ultimately can't. That's the design of Bitcoin. And so you have to somehow have kind of order out of chaos, where you have anyone can run any node software they want. It can enforce any rules they want, but somehow we all have to ultimately agree on what the rules are.
Yeah.
And so anytime we change those rules, it gets hairy very quickly.
Yeah, so if we're going to walk through sort of the history of how this has been done, we did kind of start out with one guy determining the rules, right?
Right, yeah. Forever, Satoshi just released a new version of Bitcoin. At the time, it wasn't even Bitcoin Core, and those were the rules. And people upgraded and ran it, and this was fine. There was not enough other people contributing who could practically review the code, who could give feedback, who could really take a part in this. But that, Satoshi disappeared for a reason, and that ultimately would not be a sustainable Bitcoin. This is kind of what most other cryptocurrencies do. They have some central dev team that tells everyone what to run, but this is what differentiates Bitcoin. If we were going to have Satoshi just releasing another piece of software and people upgrade to it without questioning, we should stop using Bitcoin and use something with a bigger block size, and who cares, because there's not really any point. So, over time, after Satoshi left, they're kind of moved to this Flag Day approach, right, where you have release of Bitcoin Core, and then everyone upgrades to it and runs it, and it has in the code, at a certain height, the rules will change. So at some point in the future, predefined, that we've hopefully agreed to, the rules will change, and some new feature is activated or what have you. This obviously is much nicer from the point of view of all nodes need to be enforcing the same rules. If it's just Satoshi releases a piece of software, you obviously have some upgrade time lag where there's issue there. Anyway, so for a while it was just this Flag Day style soft forks, and then eventually it moved toward...
Wait, but man, is that the case though? Were there Flag Day soft forks at any point in Bitcoin's history in that specific way?
Because Satoshi,
no. Satoshi's soft forks were basically just code releases, right?
Right. And I guess there were some proposed ones. I don't know if there was one actually done.
Yeah, he definitely proposed the block size increase.
Right.
Sort of hard fork. That was a suggestion he made as a flag day. But I don't think there was ever an actual flag day or a...
There might not have been one that was actually done. But we moved quickly towards this supermajority approach, which is, depending on what you look, 90% of hash rate has to signal. So this is another way you can kind of sidestep the every node needs to run the same rules issue, where you have miners enforcing the rules. And of course, if miners enforce the rules, then the network will stay together. It's, again, a terrible security model. You wouldn't want to store coins in a soft fork where you think only miners are enforcing the rules. You only practically want to store coins if you think all the nodes are enforcing the rules. But it does keep the network together, and it avoids these issues where, like, I think I have a Bitcoin, and I think the current chain tip is X, but Aaron thinks I don't have a Bitcoin, and the current chain tip is Y, and all of a sudden, who has a Bitcoin, and who gets double spent, and it's not pretty. So this is supermajority thing. You know, you have, I think it was a rolling window. You have 95% of hash power signaling, flagging that, yes, I've upgraded, and I'm enforcing these rules, or I'm ready to enforce the rules once 90% indicates they've upgraded, and then you avoid some of this complexity. That morphed a little bit, some technical changes, but not really any kind of theoretical implications through BIP9, and that was obviously used then for a few soft forks culminating in segwit. Everyone knows that, I hope everyone knows that segwit turned into a little bit of a drama, right? This intent to just say that miners indicate that they are enforcing the rules and ready to keep the network together in the case of any violations of the new rules, turned into, oh, we can actually block an upgrade that hopefully, I think, everyone wanted in the form of segwit by not signaling. And so this dragged out for many, many months. There was drama around, it turned into politics, right? It turned into, we can avoid this, and then it turned into personal politics and lobbying, and it was a mess. Ultimately, there was this movement in the form of BIP 148, which was kind of termed UASF and referred to as user-activated soft fork, where users said, we're just going to kind of threaten miners. We're going to run this other third version of the software. We're going to run a different set of consensus rules. And if miners don't activate segwit, if miners don't signal, then we're going to create a new coin. We're going to have a BIP 148 coin or UASF coin, and we're going to sell the non-segwit Bitcoin, and we're going to buy our UASF coin, and then that will be the new Bitcoin because that's where all the money is, and segwit will be activated.
So let me stop you right there real quick. So yeah, the idea was we're going to use miner signaling as a coordination mechanism to make sure that the network doesn't split into different networks, because if the miners are enforcing these new rules and the rules are backwards compatible, we're keeping the network together. So it was a solution in that sense as a coordination mechanism.
Right. And then
this coordination mechanism was at some point sort of used to try to influence protocol development. So in response to that, there was this UASF movement that said, okay, actually you are going to have, we will only accept blocks that signal.
Right.
And this is a point where you were critical of the UASF, I think, or of that movement in specific. Is that?
UASF is a general concept, no, but the specific implications of different users running different node softwares that enforce different rules, they're designed to enforce different rules, they explicitly enforce different rules, and potentially split the network. And we don't, depends on who you ask as to what would have happened were that split to occur, were miners to not signal and BIP 148 UASF clients to go off on their own blockchain. Certainly proponents think it was... Sorry, go ahead.
There was a lot of discussion on the game theory of the situation like that.
Right.
Like, if there would be a chain split, then you have this sort of asymmetric advantage of the USF chain, because that chain cannot be reorged away, while sort of the legacy chain can be reorged away. So there's a very strong incentive for everyone to just join the USF chain.
Right.
Do you agree with that, or do you see that differently, or?
Potentially. I mean, if you have enough hash rate not on the UASF chain, then it's maybe less of a concern, and obviously people could respond by simply ignoring the UASF chain. I think more broadly, though, there's an interesting question when we get into some of these kind of arguments around like, well, there's a strong incentive for the soft fork to activate, and we're going to create a strong incentive for it. What does that mean for kind of conservatism in Bitcoin, and how, what should the threshold be for changes to the consensus rules that form the definition ultimately of Bitcoin as a money, and like what does that imply for Bitcoin as a money, and like is that a good idea or not? So I think you quickly get into kind of much more philosophical, like, is this a threshold that we want for soft forks?
Yeah, I think one of the things that critics of the USF at least didn't like, but correct me if I'm wrong or just give your own opinion, is that the USF would sort of trigger this signaling, and therefore, well, am I saying it right? I'm saying it right, but I'm not sure if this is the critique. It would sort of drag the other nodes along with it. Sort of the regular segwit mass nodes would be dragged along with the USF movement,
right?
Which sort of helps the USF movement, or how we should, because I think there's point of critique there.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think, luckily, well, in the future, hopefully we'll have, kind of futures markets, and people can actually express economic intent, because to some extent, if you create two coins, they're just going to have a trading price, and what people want to use will probably depend a lot on that. But I think, some of the kind of like, well, it strongly incentivizes this behavior or that behavior, you very quickly just get way too deep, right? It's like, well, okay, it strongly incentivizes the signaling, but if miners actually don't want this, then they could just choose to ignore, and then that like incentive of signaling doesn't really apply because it just guarantees that you will continue to have two chains and two Bitcoins. So yeah, I mean, I think you just trying to model out that game theory is not really practical, because you get too many layers deep into, well, they do this and then they respond with that, and then they respond with this, and then this other group does this thing, and this exchange does that thing, and like it just turns into a mess, I think.
Yeah, so that's sort of, okay, so let's move one step forward. Let's move to Taproot then.
Right.
So I think everyone agrees that miner signaling is, that's still a good way of doing soft forks. It's a good way of coordinating soft forks. The problem is, what if miners don't signal? What if they start to abuse this sort of, this coordination mechanism again? How do you deal with that?
Right.
And I think there are sort of broadly two answers to that question. One is, well, I guess there are three answers. One is, let them abuse it. I guess they have veto now.
Hopefully not.
But that's not a very popular answer.
Right.
Then the other answer second answer is use lot is true, which is the mandatory signaling thing, which we've done. That's sort of the BIP 148 thing we did for the USF for segwit. And then the third answer is just do a flag day, which doesn't require any signaling. So now maybe you should kind of explain what that solution is, or what it looks like, or why you think it's a good solution.
Right. Yeah. Once you assume that miners aren't signaling through their own political reasons and not, for some specific reason, you very quickly there's not a good answer, right? So on one hand, you have this like UASF thing that users threaten to split the network, or some group of people threaten to split the network, and hopefully force signaling. On the other hand, you have this we're going to say at block height X, these new rules are active. It has a little more ability to keep the network together, in that there's not this there's not this date at which anyone who hasn't switched their software gets forked off. Instead, you have to you have to deliberately try to split the network. But maybe that's not a good thing. Unclear. If you might end up with two coins, maybe you want to do that right away. Maybe you don't. And maybe you won't end up with two coins. But it does. It also, I think, the argument against it that a lot of people have is that it feels more like centralized control, right? It feels more like someone is deciding this date, or this block height at which the rules of Bitcoin that define the money that is Bitcoin will change, and that is bad, that no one should have that ability. I think, obviously, once you get into any changes to the rules, you very quickly fall down that rabbit hole. There's not really any avoiding it. You always have some consensus process by which some group of people agree to a definition, and then everyone else either chooses to upgrade to it or doesn't, and basically then becomes a yes or no vote, right? Where either users switch their node software to something or they don't. But the process by which there becomes agreement about the specific details is always, requires some subgroup, and, should a subgroup ever exist, there's no good solution, I guess.
So if I want to, is my mic working?
Yeah.
Or not? Yeah, okay. Because there was an issue with it just now. Yeah, so if I'm going to try to sort of summarize the arguments on both sides and see if I get it right, if you agree. So I think the problem with lot is true is that it's sort of frozen an extra factor that could split the network for that reason alone. So now you're splitting the network for signaling alone.
Right.
Where you could really wonder, is that really something worth taking that sort of risk for?
Right, and I think I argued, or maybe I should highlight the argument that you shouldn't really define a soft fork as active on the basis of miners enforcing it or some signaling process. It has to be nodes enforcing it. Now they can observe that signaling process and use that to decide whether a soft fork is active, but you should never store your coins using features of Bitcoin that are only enforced by miners, because tomorrow there could be different miners and all of a sudden your coins are stolen, right? You should only ever store your coins in SegWit on the belief that the vast majority of economic nodes out there are enforcing SegWit, which they are, and we have strong confidence of that, so it's a fine idea to store your coins in those features, but you do want to, you have to use nodes to define that, right?
Yeah, that's always true in the end, is that you need nodes. So, but the question is, if you don't use signaling, then you also don't have like this objective thing to point to, and so it becomes a social consensus thing in that case, where you could have this sort of, signaling doesn't do anything technically. I think it's just a signal. It doesn't enforce anything in itself, but it still offers something. It offers a Schelling point essentially. It offers a Schelling point that people can point to and agree this is when the soft fork is active, and that might be an argument in favor of actually using signaling. So a couple of years ago with that USF, we had the signaling trigger the nodes that didn't even have BIP 148 itself. So that was sort of perceived a benefit of that USF, that it would trigger the entire network.
Right.
So, but even if you don't have that, even if you don't have a network with deployed nodes, you could argue that signaling itself is just sort of this objective thing that everyone can sort of see and point to, and exchanges can use it to determine what is the BTC ticker.
Yeah.
But it's a social thing in that sense.
I would push back on that a little bit, but first, I think it is really important to highlight what you just mentioned, that in the context of BIP 148 and the UASF around SegWit, the design of it is it tries to force miners to signal, and if miners do signal, then the network stays together, and all of these old nodes are also enforcing the rules of SegWit. You don't have potential for network fork. This does require, of course, that first you have a miner-activated soft fork with nodes that everyone is running, monitoring for signaling to determine the threshold. And I think that is an important distinction. And then kind of to your broader point about it being a Schelling point or about it being an objective measure, I think it's kind of it's a bad objective measure, right? Because we don't want miners to decide what the rules of the network are. They order transactions, and that should be, to the greatest extent possible, it.
It's a Schelling point that people can use if they want it. And in that case, it's sort of something that you can point to on the blockchain, as opposed to something that's only in sort of the Bitcoin core code.
To some extent. I think you would have a much better argument around a Schelling point of just asking exchanges what they're running or asking large custodians what they're running, and I don't think that's a great outcome either. But I think to some extent we have to do all of these things because all of them are bad, right? It's terrible to say that we agree to rule changes on the basis of miner signaling. It's terrible to say that we agree to rule changes on the basis of having exchanges and large custodians state what version of consensus rules they're running. It's terrible to have developers decide. But the best we can do is have all of these, and just selecting one and saying like we're going to decide on the basis of miner signaling, or we're going to decide on this basis or that basis, is kind of hurts Bitcoin in a sense of it makes it potentially easier for one group to force a soft fork, or for one group to make a change to the rules that we have to ultimately agree to define Bitcoin. And to some extent, I guess my argument is like we have to embrace the chaos. Like there is chaos in the sense of like we don't know objectively what everyone is running, and we can't enforce that everyone is running the same thing.
Yeah,
but
I was going to ask. So that's sort of there's two opinions there as well. Like, do we even want a process for upgrades? Do we even want, or is it even possible? Or do we just embrace that Bitcoin is anarchy and it's always going to be difficult and it's always going to be a mess, and if you want to change it, good luck with that. There is no answer to that question. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question because like, obviously, if the anarchy goes too far, we have 10 different Bitcoins and no one agrees on what anything is, and they probably all have no value. If the anarchy doesn't, if we are on the complete opposite side of the spectrum and we have complete structure, then we might as well use, I don't know, Tron or some other just thing that's just decided by developers and has some committee of developers that defines exactly what the rules are.
Clearly defined processes are probably easier to corrupt in general. That would be one of the arguments against something like that.
Right. Clearly defined groups that decide parts of the network is bad. I mean, that'd be terrible. I think there is no great answer, but I definitely fall on the kind of embrace the chaos side of the spectrum, and embrace the chaos, but also through my own actions discourage the chaos, right? Like we can't do anything to prevent anyone from running some weird fork. We can't, there's nothing we can or should do about that, but I'm going to spend my time telling people either, you should be running the software that everyone else is because that's how the network agrees, and that's how we have a Bitcoin that we all agree to, and that you should, certainly, if that software is something like Bitcoin Core, you should participate in the processes around Bitcoin Core, which are also fairly loose, but anyone can join and anyone can contribute and anyone can say what they want about how things should go, but that ultimately, no matter what happens and what that process ends up being, or even if we all agree to run something that's not Bitcoin Core, we have to agree to it, and we should all, you can advocate for whatever position you want, but ultimately we all have to value having a set of consensus rules higher than anything else. So you always have to kind of walk this line of like, well, I really think we should do this, but also it's more important that we all stick together and have one Bitcoin, so I'm not going to actually do that because I don't think enough people agree to it.
So there's another solution to solve this problem. Oh, and by the way, if anyone has any questions, I think there's a mic over there. Feel free to, because we've got like 4 more minutes and there's room for a question or two. But okay, so Matt, one other way to solve this problem is to just not change Bitcoin at all anymore.
Right.
It's done. We're done. This is it. We can't change Bitcoin. This is it forever. And that's a position some people have. How do you feel about that?
We're going to get there eventually. If every soft fork continues to have this level of drama, we will definitely be there very quickly. I'm still hoping, there's a number of features that we really want to have before we get there, I think. There's covenants and sig hash no input, and a few other, and some cleanups, fix time warp and some other stuff. Potentially.
What did he say?
He yelled drive change.
Drive change, yeah.
Drive chains, yeah. There's a number of features we'd really like to see. So I hope we're not there yet, but if we have too much drama, we will be there eventually.
Do you have any expectation or idea what could be the next soft fork? Do you have an opinion on that, or?
I have opinions, but I will wait and see what has consensus around it before I start pushing my opinion, because I would rather push for the consensus opinion than my own opinion.
All right, I think there are no questions. Matt, do you have anything more to add?
No, I'm kind of surprised there's no question.
Well, when hard fork? What do you think about hard
When hard fork?
Can Bitcoin do a hard fork? Ever?
I hope that it's possible, but I worry that it is not.
I think we can't have any hard forks at all. Why?
Yeah, again, we have this problem of coordination, and getting over that hump just might be insurmountable.
Yeah, with a hard fork, you really do need everyone to upgrade at the same time, and you can't really use the miner signaling for,
right.
At least not for the backwards compatible thing. Okay, we do have a question. Great, let's hear it. The mic isn't working. Oh, there we go.
Wouldn't BIP 300 and BIP 301 and drive chains solve all the problems that you're talking about here on stage? Because it would allow the development to occur on the side chains, and every side chain becomes an economic experiment where people can put their funds into that chain to decide what functionality and utility is actually meaningful and what they value, instead of this quote-unquote meritocracy that is really,
the point being,
real
if we have a well-functioning drive chain system, and which is considered secure, we can do which is, I guess that's the if.
Right, I think
but then we can do
if.
everything on these chains. But
right, that's the big if. I mean, I think everything in Bitcoin, as people build out side chains or drive chains and Lightning and whatever, all these things have some kind of reduced security model, right? You're never going to have quite the same security model as running on Bitcoin on the main chain, and so it's, so some people will never want to make that trade-off. And so, yes, we should have as much experimentation as we can and in the best forms that we can, and certainly side chains and drive chains potentially form a part of that. But some people will never want to make that trade-off, and nor should they have to. And so we will always still have a coordination problem around defining Bitcoin and defining the consensus rules exactly and agreeing to it to some extent.
Yeah, we should drive chains, then ossification.
One more question, that's the last one, and that's our time.
Hey, some analysts have said that that one big shift in Bitcoin could be if the miners all decide that holding Bitcoin and becoming banks instead of miners is more profitable, and they actually reduce their mining and just focus on lending out Bitcoin or lending out fiat for Bitcoin collateral. How would that affect, if that was to happen, how would that affect Bitcoin's decentralized model if the miners actually just stopped mining that much?
I think miners are paid very handsomely to mine, so I would be very surprised if that were ever an outcome. And certainly if miners decide that they can make more money doing something else, then miners will just get paid more because there'll be higher fees potentially, or the network difficulty will simply adjust and we'll have lower hash rate and blocks will still be every 10 minutes and it won't really affect it. So I would be absolutely astounded if we ever get to a point where miners are doing something else, and if we ever do get to that point, I've got an S9 sitting around somewhere and I could just plug it in and we'll still have enough miners to have a block every 10 minutes because you just need a miner for that, and I'm sure there's 10,000 other people here who will do the same thing.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's our time. Thank you everyone for showing up.